Orson Welles, of course, is our subject tonight as we listen to The War of the Worlds and talk about The War of the Worlds. We've invited a special guest to join us in the studio by the name of Michael Dawson. Michael is the Chicago filmmaker who is producing a documentary on Orson Welles entitled Citizen Welles. Michael, welcome to Radio Classics.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are paying an awful lot of attention to Orson Welles this evening, and have been paying a lot of attention to Orson Welles for quite some time now, haven't you?
Yes, I would say for the most of the past 2.5 years. 2.5 years. The time I've spent researching the man and discovering new things that I didn't know, and confirming things I did know. It's been a fascinating process, and it's been a very, very enlightening and educational experience regarding an individual who essentially made history in film, theater, and radio before the age of 30.
Now, is your documentary, Citizen Welles, mostly a compilation of film clips of things that he had done in the movies?
Well, we're going to try not to. One of the problems with most documentaries is they tend to do that. They will rely on film clips and interviews. And although we will be relying on those two aspects, we've tried to create certain visual vignettes which kind of celebrate various cinematic brushstrokes he used as a filmmaker, and we've even tried to employ certain audio techniques that he used as a radio persona. And we're basically trying to create a documentary that is a little bit outside the normal format of the documentary by putting in and boosting the aesthetics and trying to give it a little bit of a stylistic approach.
Those of us who listen to the radio and enjoy the radio days revere Orson Welles for not only the dramatic broadcast of The War of the Worlds, but so many of the other Mercury Theater on the Air things he did, and so many other radio things that he did. How much of your documentary focuses on Welles as a radio producer, personality, director, so forth?
Quite a bit. In fact, one of the things that Welles was able to do, and I think it's implicit as to why radio is still a very, very powerful medium, and that is he was able to make people watch radio. You really don't listen to radio; you watch radio. You fill in those various images as a listener, and Welles had an ability to address those very dynamics that allow an individual sitting at home or wherever to watch radio rather than listen to it. And we will, in fact, we opened the film with an audio track where he's basically having an argument, doing a voiceover for a television commercial, a British television commercial. And it's somewhat humorous, and the screen will be blank. This will start off for about 30 seconds. And there will be no images whatsoever. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to gear the audience to listening to the audio track in a more dominant sense than you normally would if you had an audio track accompanied by pictures. And then pictures are gradually introduced faster and faster and faster, and then a montage builds up for the climax of this argument that Welles is having with an ad agent over how to read the script for this particular commercial.
Imagine someone giving Orson Welles directions on how to read.
It's humorous. I think that it's humorous. It's a little bit sad when you listen to it on one level, and on another level, it's actually quite humorous. It's a shame that he was even occupying himself with such endeavors, but like anyone, he had to pay the grocery bill.
A segment of your film deals with the War of the Worlds. And we see, I think, Welles talking at a news conference following the dynamic broadcast of the night before. And then you have a very interesting on-screen guest, Richard Wilson, Dick Wilson.
Yes.
Now, who is Dick Wilson?
Dick was an individual that met up with Welles in the early Mercury radio days. He basically came in as an administrative assistant and quickly moved into certain creative areas. He produced Welles' Macbeth, the film later that he did. He was an assistant director on both Citizen Kane and Magnificent Ambersons. And in terms of Mercury Theater and Mercury on the Air, which were, the Mercury Group was an entity both in theater and radio almost simultaneously. He participated in certain associate producer functions, stage managing. He was as a personal assistant to Mr. Welles, he was almost his right-hand man, and Mr. Welles in terms of having administrative assistants, I would say Dick Wilson certainly was an individual that, much to his credit, was able to help Mr. Wells in a lot of areas, both in terms of radio, theater, and later in film. And
in your documentary, Citizen Wells, he vividly recalls that October 30th, 1938 broadcast, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. He was not, at the time they were rehearsing Danton's death across town, and so he was not able to participate as both in terms of being an assistant, a production assistant, but as well as an actor in the entire radio broadcast. But he participated in the first half of it, and I think he relays a story about how he had to leave. But the point is, being that it was the first half, I think, of the broadcast, it really is what created the bulk of the panic as a response on the part of the listeners.
Well, you brought us a soundtrack, a clip from the soundtrack of your documentary, Citizen Wells, and here is Dick Wilson remembering the War of the Worlds broadcast.
The first time I met him in person was as a radio actor. I had seen him in Denver, Colorado, playing in Romeo and Juliet, and his fame had already preceded him. Oh, this wonderful young actor. Leaving the University of Denver with my very meager earnings, I went to as many plays as I possibly could. And finally I saw, I think, Faustus and Horseat's Hat, and that just wowed me. So I had already met him, in a sense. I had worked with him already on a radio program, but I was a kind of non-entity. And he was a star, always coming in at the last moment. That's why he was the greatest radio actor there ever was. He could walk in, take a script, look at it, give it instant characterization, instant intelligence, anything that you wanted. He was a perfect radio actor. Walt Stewart, a fellow radio actor who had introduced Dawson to radio, played with him on the March of Time, was a what we would call now an associate producer of all of the radio plays, so that he would set sound patterns. He would set where the music came in. He would conduct a rehearsal like a stage manager conducts a rehearsal in the theater. Then Orson would come in at the end, and he would polish it and make it truly as he did his pictures. I did this same function in one of the later radio series, so I got to be quite familiar with it. Now, the script of the War of the Worlds was giving Howard Koch tremendous troubles. And John Houseman called Paul Stewart and said, this is like on a Wednesday, and let us say the program was on a Friday. I can't remember the exact days, but the relationship of days is about that. Howard cannot write this project. We've got to go up there and help him. So Paul Stewart went up with Jack Houseman and a woman named Anne Froelich, who was Koch's secretary at the time, and said, this is the way we're going to do this. And he sort of set the format of the interruptions, the guest appearances of the Secretary of the Interior, all of that. And then my memory is that it was delayed because the mimeograph department couldn't get to it quite in time. They were asked to stay open all night so that we could have scripts the next day and things like that. So I think that while Howard has the copyright, and Howard did do much of the writing, a lot of the credit still belongs to Paul Stewart and Jack Houseman. It was a period that of tremendous activity. My memory is that it was a sustaining broadcast. That meant that none of us really got paid anything more than the union minimum. We were doing Danton's death at the time. I was the stage manager of Danton's death, and because we had a semi-dress rehearsal that night, my participation as an actor happened in the first two portions of the first half of the program. I didn't even bother to save the script. None of us believed that it was as effective as it turned out to be. And for many years, and it's one of the things that I deplore the most, is the loss of some rehearsal records. I had the records on acetate in which the actors are acting away, and Benny Herman, the musical director, has got the orchestra going, and Orson is whispering in the microphone to the control room saying, Jack, we've got to do something about this. It's terrible. It's terrible. We'll be fired. This is the worst thing ever put on the air. Nobody's going to believe a word of it. Now, Jack, as soon as we break, we've got to get together and think of some way to do this program better. We never got to do it better. It was essentially what it was, and the result is history.
The rest is history. Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast. That sounds like a very dramatic moment in the documentary, Michael.
Well, the bottom line is that Welles did extremely well regarding the other programs he did in radio, the other various plays they put on radio. The War of the Worlds is really a very small part of that, and I don't think it's really an example of his genius and his ability in a more general sense. However, what that did is it created such a panic in terms of the audience that the response was so incredible that it raised the eyebrows of Hollywood. Hollywood, as you know, is motivated and fueled by hype, and they saw an individual who had a basic reputation for being this boy wonder in terms of stage and radio, figuring, well, if this guy can get this kind of reaction regarding a radio program, what could he do in the area of cinema and in filmmaking?
And, of course, the rest of that is history, too.
That is correct.
When is your documentary going to open?
Well, we would like to. Basically, the screenwriters' strike kind of threw apart our agenda this past summer, and we had to change the schedule a couple of times for that and logistical reasons. And we're still continuing to sell off stock in Citizen Wells, Inc., which is how we're financing it. We plan now to open it at the Berlin Film Festival this coming February. We've got about a month more production to do and about 2 months' worth of post-production to do.
And then when will we be able to see it? In Chicago?
Shortly after the Berlin release. We wanted to introduce it in Europe and then introduce it in the United States shortly after that. And it will be theatrically released as a showcase effect in approximately 4 to 5 major U.S. cities. And then shortly after that, it will go to video cassette.
Terrific. So I know so many people are interested in Orson Welles, and certainly the people who have been listening to us this evening are interested in Welles, the radio actor and the creator of this earth-shattering broadcast from so many years ago. We'll want to see the documentary. Citizen Wells, opening up probably early in 1989. And we appreciate you being with us tonight, Michael Dawson, for what you're doing and for what you brought. Some very interesting clips. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.